So over to you, Elizabeth, first to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Fenella. My name is Elizabeth Radchenko, and I am a PhD candidate in aerospace cybersecurity. Basically, I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm looking forward to an educational and fun panel.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And now handing over to Johannes.
Hi, thank you, Fenella. My name is Johannes Stutz. I'm an airline pilot based in Munich. So I fly the Airbus A320, short and medium range aircraft. So I'm flying all over Europe. And on the other hand, I'm also a self-taught machine learning developer because I've been furloughed for almost a year now since COVID hit. So I'm working as an intern at a data startup in Berlin, where I'm working on remote sensing applications, both on the technical side, as well as customer support and business development.
Thanks, Johannes. And finally to Arpad. Oh, you need to unmute.
Thank you for that. Yeah, exactly. That's the number one obstacle to come through. I'm an aviation lawyer by background, but have been working in the field of executive search and leadership assessment for coming up to 7 or 8 years now, focusing on the industrial sectors, which includes but is not limited to aviation and aerospace. And I also coach pilots, but also other aviation professionals who are having to reinvent themselves in the current climate. So that's me.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So the topics that we're going to try and cover today are what roles will be most in demand in the future with aviation, the feasibility of retraining the existing workforce, and we'll get some good input from Johannes about that, and entry requirements for the next generation. So I guess we'll sort of start with the first one, which is what roles will be most in demand. I'll start off. I personally think, working as an aviation recruiter, that we will see sort of a continuation of jobs such as aviation engineering. They will grow. They haven't been as badly affected as the pilot side of things. Obviously, once we get back flying, which I think will come down a lot to when governments decide that we can start travelling again and going overseas, then the pilots pilot roles will start to be more in demand, but obviously not back to the same state that it was before. However, there will be openings, because obviously some people have taken voluntary redundancy. Some people have moved on to do different things and they won't come back to the pilot side of their life. Johannes, what was your input on that?
Yeah, thanks, Vanilla. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we have to separate short-term from long-term here, because I think short-term, I can only speak for the pilot side here, for the flight side. But I think short-term, it will stay pretty difficult. We have some areas where there's good demand, like cargo operations is booming. So they're hiring and they're flying a lot of hours, and that's pretty good branch. But everything else, so leisure travel, business travel is low, as you all know. And I don't think it will recover that fast. There will be some recovery for leisure travel, I guess, because people just want to go on holidays. But business travel will stay low for the foreseeable future. So I don't think the demand will be as high as in the last years. However, I do think that long-term travel will be back. And I also don't think that pilots will be made obsolete in the next years. I also don't think we will have single pilot operation anytime soon. So as soon as travel is back, I think pilots will have chances again for employment, I'm sure.
Absolutely agree. Arpad or Elizabeth, did you have any input on that one?
Yes, absolutely. So I agree with Johannes when he said, there's short-term view and then there's a long-term view. I think I can provide a little bit of input on the long-term view, because I think that aviation jobs in the future are going to look a little bit different than the jobs that we currently have, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that the jobs we have now will disappear. Like Johannes said, pilots are going to stay for a while, probably longer than 10 years. And from my personal perspective, I don't know how I would feel flying on a plane that's that's not controlled by a person, by a pilot. So I think that's going to be just in the very, very, future, not like in the next decade or so. And then, so, the fundamentals jobs such as pilots, the flight attendants, mechanics, engineers will probably remain for at least another 10 years. I think that's because these type of jobs are difficult to replace with technology. I'm saying this from an aerospace engineer point of view, so you might disagree, you might agree. And I think that the jobs that require immediate assistance, if there's a technical malfunction, for example, in air traffic controllers. So I don't really think that kind of a job, an air traffic controller job, should be replaced with a computer, just because if the computer makes a mistake, or if the computer doesn't know what to do next, then that might not end well. And I'm not saying that current air traffic controllers are perfect and they're not going to make mistakes, but I still think that a human would be better in a situation that's stressful if an accident happens when the plane is in the air.
Arpad, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think as Johannes pointed out rightly, it's going to be short and medium and long term. I think short and medium term, what we are seeing is that the most qualified or the most experienced personnel are leaving the industry simply because they can't be they can't put up with another downturn. Obviously, aviation is a cyclical industry, but I think once you've been in it for 20, 25, 30 years, what I see is that especially people at senior technical or senior training captain, sort of 50, 55, 60 years, they tend to leave the industry. Unfortunately, they don't tend to just say that, yeah, we'll stick it out. I think there's no shortage, of course, of junior people, like first officer level people. They want to stick it out and they want to stay. But yeah, I think we will see a shortage in the sort of medium term when it comes to the most senior personnel, basically. So yeah, I would agree with Elizabeth as well. That basically, the in terms of ATC and also piloting, I think these are roles that need to be at least supervised by humans. You can't really automate the whole thing. So jobs are here to stay, but not great short, medium term. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. As a recruiter, pre-COVID, we would get a lot of pilots with low hours, so straight out of flying school or an academy with 250 hours, looking for roles. And it was very unusual back pre-COVID to even get a job in that capacity straight into an airline. It wasn't impossible, but we would spend a lot of time encouraging them to go and do something else to build their hours, whether it's parachute operations or banner towing or flight instructor or whatever. But so it's going to be quite difficult, I think, for people coming, out of flying schools and academies. Not that many seem to be running at the moment, but yeah, there will be a shortage at some point. It's just, yeah, it's if and when, I guess, is the hard thing. But I guess the other thing we want to talk about is retraining the existing workforce, etc. So, sorry, Elizabeth.
Oh, I just had a quick point on the first question that we had. I saw the comment by Ernest, and I completely agree with what Ernest said about, you know, how I was saying about the air traffic controllers. Even in movies, those are not, you know, those are real people. So I guess that makes sense that some roles will not be automated for at least a while. Thank you.
No worries. I think it's interesting to pass over to Johannes, because as an airline pilot, you're now doing a slightly different job. Did you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure, I can do that. I don't know how far it's generalizable on the general population, but yeah, for me, I was planning on building a plan B, as we always like to name it, besides flying, because from my personal experience, I've experienced how unstable the whole industry can be. So I've been working as a pilot now for 4 years, and that's my 4th airline I'm flying now. And also I've had health issues where I saw, okay, it can be so quickly over with the aviation career. So I've been looking around for things to do besides that, and was fascinated by the whole AI thing for a while now. And just from a first principles point of view, I was thinking, okay, what's one thread for my main career? It's automation. And so I want to go in the area, how is automation applied? How is it actually developed? And so that's where I put my time and energy into. And so for me, the whole COVID crisis was also kind of a chance, because now I had a lot of time on my hands to really dive into that. And yeah, it's difficult to do this alone without university, without someone teaching you. You have to pull together all the resources for yourself. The resources are out there. It's so good what YouTube and Udacity and all that stuff can teach you. You can learn anything really. The challenge is to pull this together and set your priorities and what do you actually need to learn. But you can do it. And for me, now after about a year or so, I noticed that my progress was slowing down, because there's only so much you can do for yourself and alone and doing with hobby projects. So I decided to reach out for companies who maybe like to hire me as an internship or a consultant. And it was very difficult to just go on LinkedIn and look what jobs were out there, because they have very strict requirements. They almost always want PhDs and computer scientists, and the bigger the company, the stricter this is. So what I did was I looked for companies who looked interesting, small companies, startups, and wrote applications very tailored for them and why it might be interesting for them to have me and why I find them interesting. And that worked pretty good. So yeah, I got an offer for an internship at a really, really cool company. So my takeaway from this story is be open to learn, find something that you really like, learn about that. It doesn't have to be an academic degree necessarily, just learn about it, learn to apply it, and then be open, reach out to companies, and be aware of your strengths. I think that's a problem that some pilots have. It's a very specific kind of work, and it's not always obvious how you can apply your strengths there in another job. That's maybe something that ArcPilot you can chime into. But yeah, so committing to your strengths and be open, be communicating, and reach out to companies. That were some aspects that really helped me in building something besides the aviation career.
Arpad, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we talk about these transferable skills all day, every day, but I think it's best to be just for anyone who's transitioning basically from one industry or one role to the other. I think you just need to be aware that you are up against people who have 2, 3, 5, 10 years of experience in the relevant sector, in the relevant job. So I think it's basically just manage your expectations, because if you're, I would say in the current climate, if you're not a 10 out of 10 candidate, just don't bother, because basically there's like any kind of opening is attracting an awful lot of interest at the moment from very well qualified people, and it's always going to be an uphill battle when you're trying to switch industries. I mean, obviously pilots do bring an awful lot of good, relevant, solid experience. I mean, apart from the hard skills, the soft skills are obviously leadership, the team management, the accuracy, the ability to work with someone that you've never worked with before, and also really the numerical skills, the mathematical skills that you need, of course, which are of course going to be viewed very favorably. But I think most employers, especially outside of the sector, outside of aviation, are still not 100% clear on what someone from a flying role can bring into something which is an office-based sort of position. I mean, that's the battle that I see most of the people that I work with experience on a day-to-day basis, convincing that they're in fact capable of doing something more than just piloting.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It is a hard one. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you guys, so what I heard, and I think this is true, but I want to ask you because I'm not a pilot and I'm just like behind the scenes on this. So at first, being a pilot is, well, it's always rewarding, but it's considered, you have to be at least a 10-year experienced pilot. So you have to have 10 years of experience before you can actually, well, what you call be successful in the industry. And I'm not just saying like financially, but just like how people see you. Is that true? And how can we change that? Because I don't think that, if you're a pilot, you fly, that's already amazing, awesome. You don't have to do it for 10 years for people to think you're awesome. So.
Yeah, I don't know if you need to do it for 10 years to be successful. But yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty amazing when I used to send someone first solo, they're flying a plane for the first time. That's a huge achievement in itself. And whether you've got a private license or a commercial license or an ATPL, it doesn't really matter. You are successful. Obviously, piloting doesn't necessarily pay what it used to pay 20 years ago when I came into the industry. And in some countries it pays quite poorly. I think it's up to you whether you think you've been successful or not. I think the big question is, what are the transferable skills? Like, Johannes, did you sort of sit down and think, right, all these things that I do as a pilot, how does that transfer to something else? Like, how did you go about, in terms of putting your CV together, or when you were in interviews, how did you deal with that?
So for my current role, to be honest, I didn't emphasize the flying part too much. So all the things Arpit mentioned, yeah, I agree, absolutely. And we do have some good leadership skills, especially the captains, of course, but first officers as well. That's all true. But now for my current role, I didn't talk about that too much, to be honest. I showed my experience in the machine learning side because that was much more relevant for this role. I do think that all the other points, what was it? Being able to work with people you've never met before, and also working under stress, doing repeatable, structured work in a critical environment. This is all right. I don't know what's the best way to market that, or if employers outside the industry or even in the industry, but for a completely different role, appreciate it by themselves. I think there's some convincing you have to do when you're in that unfortunate role.
Arpit?
Yeah, and exactly, because most people that I tend to deal with, they never had to, or they never sat down and went through in their head, okay, what are my transferable skills? I think most people, this phrase is unknown, of course, they never had to deal with this before, and they never thought that they are going to work in anything else other than in the cockpit, basically. So it's, I think identification is one thing, identifying those skills that will be transferring to other, or that can be transferred into other things, is one thing, but it's also finding the relevant organizations, industries, and also business units, business lines within those organizations. I think that's where most people struggle with, simply because they never had to do this before, and I think that's where most people need the help with as well. So basically, it's to gaining clarity as to what else is out there. It's really thinking outside the cockpit box that is very difficult, I think, for the vast majority of the population that is at home at home.
Yeah, I like that. Think outside the cockpit box. Absolutely. And I think too, we're sort of talking here around, people that are looking to maybe move away from the piloting side of things, or to come back to it down the track when jobs start to open up. I guess it's also something I'm finding interesting is that, for example, if you are to go out and look at, branching into something different, or taking what would be for some airline pilots a step back to instructing again, there's often walls up, because people are thinking, well, no, if I give you an instructing job, or I let you work over here as a real estate agent, once aviation starts to take off again, are you going to leave? So yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, and barrier that people will be coming up against as well. So
definitely, like, what's the guarantee that even if I give you a job, what's the guarantee that you will be here in a year or two's time? Basically, are you worth the investment? I think that's what most employers would like to know.
Yeah, that definitely makes it sort of tough. Just getting back to the feasibility of retraining the existing workforce, I guess just what I'm thinking is it is tough. I've got friends that are airline pilots that have not flown for over a year now, and they're quite worried. But then they go jump at a simulator and they actually do quite well, which is great. But there's obviously a lot of stress and anxiety going with this. And I know what that feels like, because I've moved from Australia and I haven't converted my commercial license to EASA. So I was quite concerned the first time I got back into an aeroplane, but in actual fact, it was fine. So there's a lot of stress with that. I know that some simulator centres are being encouraged to drop their prices so that pilots can go and jump in the simulator and get current, or just get comfortable again, and that's been encouraged by the government, and I think it's also important for their mental health. What are people's thoughts on that? Elizabeth, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the training that it should be provided to as many people as possible, because I think that like as you were saying, about the simulation, usually it's expensive to do, and pilot school is extremely expensive unless there's a scholarship available. So I also think that there should be some help from the government, from some independent companies, to help train the workforce.
Johannes, how do you feel about that? Because how long has it been since you flew?
Almost exactly a year now. Yeah, a year and a week, if I check the date. Yeah, so for me, because I'm lucky to work at a major legacy airline, I don't have to personally stress out about anything license related, because the company is dealing with that. I haven't received any training in the term in the time of furloughing now. But it will as soon as demand gets back up and they're retraining the staff. So I know there will be enough simulator sessions scheduled and I don't have to pay for them. Of course, there's the question, okay, after not flying for a year, what about your skills? Don't they deteriorate? And from my personal experience, yes, they do a bit, but yeah, like you mentioned, Fenella, if you're back in the sim again and flying a few rounds, you get back into it pretty quickly. So yeah, I consider myself very lucky to have a company that is providing all that, and I don't have to worry financially, and that's good. Of course, it would be better if they kept all pilots current, because there is a lot of stress involved. There are mental issues involved. A lot of people really identify with this job. And if you're now sitting at home and are alone and don't have any connection to aviation anymore, that's bad. So I would wish there was, I would also wish that we wouldn't fly, or at our company at least, we have a fixed team of people who fly and a larger fixed team of people who are staying at home for quite a while now. So I would wish it would be more mixed, and anyone would stay current and stay flying. But of course, I also understand that the financial pressure is huge on the airlines, and they're trying to save every euro they can. So it's just a cheaper way to keep a small amount of pilots current and the other at home. But at the same time, I don't think that's a huge problem in the long run, because of course, training can also be provided even after quite a while, and we will get current again. No worries.
Arpad?
Yeah, I think keeping qualifications and licenses current is not really an issue if you're employed still, or if you're furloughed, and if you've been kept on by a major airline, of course, like Lufthansa. But I think a lot of people that I speak to, they're having to deal with that on their own, and really in some cases they're having to pay $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 equivalent to really just keep current. And I think that's a real issue for the vast majority of people out there now, really just making sure that you've got the licenses, the medicals current. And the one thing I wanted to mention, is basically a lot of airlines are, and you're of course much better qualified to comment on that, but a lot of airlines are specifying experience, like flying experience. You have to have been flown in less than 12 months. I think a lot of people are getting to the stage like Johannes, that they haven't flown for a year now, basically. And I think if airlines are not changing that, or won't change that, then that might be the end of the road for a lot of people, basically, for a lot of people's careers who haven't flown for a year now, and they automatically disqualify by the standards of those airlines that require experience, which is less than 12 months, or not more than 12 months out of the cockpit. What are your thoughts on that? What's your experience?
I look, to be honest, we haven't had a huge number of pilot jobs that we've been recruiting for, surprisingly enough. But I think airlines are going to have to change that. That's just not going to work. I mean, what are they going to do? Of course, you want to take someone who's experienced like Johannes over someone with 250 hours that's just got out of a Cessna 172. So, I think, yeah, that will have to change, and they will probably have to do more retraining, or more simulator sessions, or cycles, or whatever you want to call it, because it's just, that's just not, it's not logical, and it's a whole different demographic with what's happened with COVID. So it's like extensions on medicals and flight renewals. So my Australian license and medical all got extended by like 6 months. Not that it mattered to me, but they had to do that. So rules have to be changed in this instance. They really do. We might just have a 10-minute break now, and then we will come back. Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
See you.
Thanks, very much appreciate that. As Fenella said, let's just take 10 minutes now, and we'll let you know in chat, send a message when the session's about to restart. See you in a bit.
Thanks, Chris. Chris. So yeah, just following on from the discussion that we had before about the future of aviation, I guess one thing that we've been talking about is retrain the existing workforce and how that's affecting people. I guess one of the things that I wanted to sort of bring up was, you know, the concern how that's affecting people with their mental health. I mean, obviously, I think it's affecting everyone's mental health, isn't it? It doesn't matter whether you're a pilot or not. It's hard, and it's hard being in lockdown, and it's been a year, and we haven't travelled, etc., etc. And I just, yeah, was just interested in how people felt that this retraining was also going to encompass making sure that people were okay and feeling comfortable, you know, mentally. What are your thoughts, Johannes, as an airline pilot?
Yeah, so I think, I'm not sure, but I think I'm one of the few people who actually haven't flown at all in a year, at least in my company. So I think most of them had the chance to get some form of training or flying in the last months. And from what I heard, this is, of course, a huge step towards a more normal life, work life again. Because like I mentioned, it is a special job, and a huge number of people who, as you know, who work in this area really define with their job, or identify with their job, define themselves as pilots, not as someone who is working at an airline. No, they are a pilot. And every step towards normalcy is good. So yeah, even the situation for us, and we are employed, we have some kind of job security. It's not perfect, and it's nobody knows what's coming, but compared to people who've lost their job, we are in a very lucky situation. So I can only imagine for someone who lost their job, who has to decide for themselves, okay, do I have like Arvid mentioned, it's huge numbers you have to spend just to stay current. And to face that decision, do I spend 20, 30,000 euros now just to stay current, to slightly increase my chances for employment once the crisis is over? I really don't envy anyone in that situation. And I think there's also lacking support. At least in Germany, our profession is not officially recognized. If I lost my job and would apply for Social Security, and they would try to connect me with future employers, I wouldn't have any official qualification. It's just a license. It's like a driver's license. And I think it's similar internationally, right? And that's a problem as well. That's coming back to transferability of skills. If your profession is not recognized officially, it's very hard to market that. So I don't know any cases. You were speaking of mental health. I cannot speak too much about that. In my colleague circle or my friends who are flying, it's pretty okay. Everybody found something to fill their time with, and we're optimistic. But I'm sure that's not the case for anybody. And the faster we will get to normalcy there, the better. Yeah, no question. What are your thoughts? You have more contacts to people who lost their jobs, or just in a broader area?
Well, I've personally got lots of contacts, whether they're in Europe or back in Australia and New Zealand, and I must say, you know, I do have concerns for some of my friends, especially on the other side of the world, because I think places like Australia have been particularly hard hit, and international travel is obviously a huge component for countries that are that isolated compared to Europe and the UK. I just personally think that's something that needs to be looked at as well as, you know, retraining and supporting pilots with that. They also need to be aware that, you know, it's almost important to have that out there already, so that people aren't worrying, because you know we were talking about whether you have to have 12 months recency or 6 months recency, and I did actually ask Sharon Nicholson, who's on here. She's the chairperson for the British Women's Pilots, her opinion on that, and she did say, yeah, it's in the chat, you can all read it, but it's incomprehensible. Freelines now ask people to have flown the last 6 months, but people are still going to be concerned about that. They're still going to worry about it. I think that needs to be out there more. Airlines need to make it quite clear that that's okay. Things are different, and we're going to take that into account, because I think that's when things start to get hard for people in their headspace. What are your thoughts, Arpad?
Yeah, listening to Johannes it very closely resembles the mindset of the vast majority of the people that I tend to work with. I'm essentially a bus driver. I have a driving license. Of course, it's an Airbus rather than a normal bus, but still, it's really, what else can I do other than really driving a van for Amazon at 2 a.m. at night? And basically, this is exactly the sort of mindset which is so difficult to change with people, because in most cases, as Johannes said, there's no other qualification other than the ATPL to work with, basically, and most people outside of the sector don't really know that your employer invested 6 figures into your training, basically, and it's an awful lot of money that goes into the training of commercial pilots. What other profession is out there where your employer is investing I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 pounds basically into your own development and health and everything? So, but this is what I mentioned, Fernanda. I think the issue is that there is a lack of education and a lack of awareness outside of the sector, even in other forms of transportation, whether it's urban mobility or ground transportation or shipping, what someone with a piloting background can bring to the table. I think it's basically it's the ultimate project management role, because you're not sitting behind a bulletproof door 24/7. There's a pre-flight element, there's a during flight element, and then there's a post-flight. So if you think about it as a project manager, you can sort of sell this to risk project, and those are the sort of roles where I've seen people really make successful transition into. If you ask me, sort of what roles can you go into it, those basically. That's what I've seen in real life.
And Elizabeth, what are your thoughts around the retraining and making sure that people are retrained, but you know, also happy in their own mindset and comfortable with knowing what's coming when they go back looking for a job?
Well, I think for now, a lot of pressure is obviously on people who aren't currently employed as pilots or in other aviation roles. And I think that one thing that the airlines or companies can do is provide some kind of online training, maybe just for people, you know, well, I'm not saying that, you know, people forget what they know in a year or in 6 months, but I'm just saying, you know, if they can provide some kind of an online training, then that can also help with not only the knowledge, you know, practicing the knowledge that people have, but also with mental health, because it feels like, okay, so, you know, this isn't a real simulation, but at least I'm kind of in the industry, in my kind of place. So I think that might make people feel better. I mean, I know I would feel better if I had something like that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's a tough one, but yeah, maybe the next step is you know, that people are made to feel comfortable that it's going to be okay. It doesn't matter, I've got a friend in Australia. She's been told she won't be up the pointy end for another 2 years. So it'll be 3 years in total. So, this was a major legacy carrier. So, for people like that, as long as they're told, look, it's okay that you're working at the supermarket down the road, but, we will make sure that you can come back into the cockpit and you will be comfortable and you don't need to worry. And because I think that's the toughest thing about it at the moment, is this kind of unknown about, what are things going to look like. I guess the other thing we were talking about was entry requirements for the next generation. And I'm just going to refer back to Sharon Nicholson again, who, as I said, is the chairperson for British Women's Pilot Association. She's written in the chat here, new low-hour pilots still remain attractive to airlines that like to mould their pilots. And that's a very valid point. In any profession, it's sometimes easier to mould people and not have to change ways that they do things, and get lower cost pilots, plus enticing older retired pilots to return will be useful to get experienced training pilots, as without them we cannot take on or train younger new pilots, and this was already slowing down progress pre-COVID. So a very good point there. What is everyone's thought about people that are training to be a pilot now, because they are out there? You can still flying schools presently. What are people's thoughts on that, Elizabeth? Okay, I've had you had your hand up. Sorry, Elizabeth.
No, what I would say is that it's important to bear in mind that contrary to popular belief, the world is not coming to an end this time. It is bad, but in terms of pilot training and all that, incredibly important. This is still a career. There will be opportunities in the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years, which is, of course, it sounds bad for someone who's in it now and who would need a job right now, because in pilot terms, 5 years is an eternity. It's a career, essentially. But I think it's really important to bear in mind that the industry is here to stay. I mean, and going into it is still not a bad idea. What I think is a bad idea, though, is to imagine that only being a pilot and not having any other qualifications and not knowing anything else is going to be right, basically, and going to be a sustainable route. Because it won't be. You really need to have a backup sort of plan. If things like this happen again in the future, you can really fall back. I think any kind of management degree, any kind of business degree, engineering degree, something that you can really rely on when work dries up as a pilot, basically.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
So you need to be a pilot and something
else. Yeah, I'm also the careers advisor for the British Women's Pilot Association, and I get a lot of these people that are starting to learn to fly, sort of, coming to me and asking questions, and I'm quite open and honest with them that it's not the absolute best time to be doing it, but we all know that. But also, they might want to look at something else, even if it's air traffic control, aircraft engineering. Both those jobs pay really well, often better than pilot jobs. And I've got friends that have come from those industries pre-COVID, that have gone on and become flying instructors, or got their PPL and bought their own Cirrus or whatever it might be. So yeah, sort of, I agree with you entirely. You need to have something else under your belt, in case something like this happens again. And I don't think it's a bad thing on your CV anyway, to show that you can, think laterally and in different ways, not just as an aviator.
Yeah.
Johannes, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree what you said. That's the one thing I would do differently if I had to start my career all over again. I would really look for best an academic degree, because I realize it's just, I don't think you have to go to college or university. It's just so much easier to show your qualification once you have that sheet of paper that says, yep, you can do something else. So I would highly recommend anyone who's playing with the thought of starting to fly, do something else first. It's really so much easier for the mind if you know, okay, that's not my only plan, but I have something real that I'm able to do in case I don't find a job quickly. So yeah, I'd absolutely recommend that. And maybe you were speaking, Fenella, about doing something in aviation engineering or aircraft engineering or ATC. I'm not sure if I agree with that, because I have the feeling that's still laying all your eggs in one basket, because if aviation goes down in general, I don't know if another aviation job is the best idea. But it's still better than only having the flying thing. Another thing to consider is obviously the financial risk, because when you don't go through training at an airline, but you go to flight school, there's a huge amount of money you have to pay up front or from a bank loan. And you always have that pressure with you, and that pressures young first officers into roles that are so badly paid. We even had jobs where first officers were required to pay for the first 500 hours just because the airline knows, okay, they have such a high pressure to get those first hours under their belt that they actually pay money additional to their training costs they've already covered. So that's another thing to consider if it's really worth the risk. And that's obviously coming back to the point, okay, at least have a viable option to do something else to pay off that huge debt in case you don't find an aviation job within the first few years, because that pressure is always building up. So yeah, I think in general, we all agree, don't rely on this job for now, but just reach out and yeah, broaden your horizon and your skill set, and that's something that will always be of benefit for you.
Elizabeth, what are your thoughts? Obviously, you're a well-qualified person.
Well, I honestly completely agree with what the three of you are saying, is that, well, you know, in addition to being in aviation, it could be good to have some other qualifications. But I also think that, for example, if you get a college degree, it's usually, well, it's not always, but most of the time it's a requirement, or at least a recommendation, to work in aviation. And like Johannes said, you know, it's like this piece of paper that you just show, and it also depends on what university the person goes to. You know, some universities are much better than others. So is it the same piece of paper? Does the person have the same qualifications? So I think that for the next generation of workforce, like for, you know, for people in high schools, colleges, I think that there should be more things done for them as well. Not just, you know, the training, which is great, but also maybe something like some incentives that they can have so that they want to be in the industry, that we can get more people who want to be in the industry. You know, seminars, some competitions between them so that they're interested. Yeah, but I think that you know, what you were saying is definitely right. And even though I think aviation, even though I think aviation is what I want to do with my life for the rest of my life, if I didn't do that, I might do some kind of a project management position, you know, like Arpad was saying. So that could work.
Arpad?
Yeah, what I see at the moment, there are a lot of people, especially pilots, realize that, oh, we don't have any formal qualifications. Let's go out there and basically just let's invest a lot of money into an MSc or an MBA or whatever it is. Basically, what I would say to that is just be very cautious. I don't think today is particularly is a really good day to get into debt. And I think it's really important to just be aware what what the qualification that you are embarking on is going to lead to. Basically, it's just have those conversations with people who are in jobs that you are planning to get into. Really, just get to the bottom of it. Do you really need this? Is it going to really get you a job at all? Don't just collect pieces of paper, because what employers are looking for at the moment is tangible benefit, as to you can really make a difference to their organizations. Basically, can you bring in clients? Can you make things more efficient? Can you make savings? Those are the things that really top degrees. And so it's gather solid evidence and not certifications. That would be my top tip for the day, I think.
Okay. That's interesting. And maybe this is, or could you comment on that if that's a country-specific thing? Because from my perspective in Germany, especially the big companies seem to be very conservative what's regarding qualifications and academic qualifications. I'm not sure if that's a culture thing, but from my impression, yes, the piece of paper helps.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely, and I'm also from a place which is very conscious of piece of papers and all that. And this is the difficulty, that you not only have to have the image, especially places like Germany, Switzerland, Austria, wherever it is, yeah, especially in the German-speaking countries, it does matter that whether or not you have a degree, but then on top of that, especially now, you really need to have some kind of solid, even if it's just volunteering, even if it's just mentoring, something that you can back those skills that you've gained on the course back, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. I guess the other way to look at it too is because someone who wants to train to be a pilot, obviously we fully encourage that, but you could put it on hold for a couple of years and do something else that you've always wanted to do, but thought, well, no, I'm going to do this. You could see it as a chance to do something else while you wait for that industry to come back. So there's always a silver lining to everything, but yeah, it is what it is. Did anyone else have anything else to say? Because I think we'll probably draw to a close. If anyone's got any questions, if they can pop them in the chat now. Johannes, Arpad?
Yeah, I just realized we were talking pretty much only about the flight deck now in this conversation, and of course there's so many other roles, and cabin crew and aviation is such a big industry that we were leaning very much towards the flight deck today. But I think
the things we talked about are very much transferable. Basically.
Agreed.
I think so.
Agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I'll hand back to you, Chris. There's no questions in the chat that I can see at the moment.
No, I really appreciate that. Thanks, Fenella, and thanks to you, Elizabeth, Johannes.
Thank you.
Very, very much appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, Chris.